Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Skull Session Recruiting Podcast. We're going live again here on Monday. Big win for Ohio State to start the season. Pretty much cruise control over Akron. Some recruiting visitors, commitment over the weekend. Philip Bell, 4-star wide receiver. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and just kind of the state of Ohio State recruiting as we get into the season. We will certainly get into questions. So if you guys want to populate those now while we talk a little bit, that's fine. We'll get to them in order as soon as we can. So we'll kind of talk about whatever you guys want to talk about today. And this is a recruiting podcast, but if you want to ask about the team or the game or whatever, I was able to kind of rewatch things on the computer the other day. I was actually at a game, which we'll talk about here in a little bit on Saturday afternoon. I was at a high school game, so I didn't get to see everything live, but I was able to kind of catch up on everything, so we can talk about the game or whatever else you guys want to talk about today. First of all, Kevin, Philip Bell committing, big pickup for Ohio State. I know that was kind of a guy we had put down as, although Javen McFadden beat him to the punch, was kind of a guy we talked about maybe being the next to commit. And so they were absolutely, I think, thrilled to get that one, another excellent receiver into the program. And Kevin, just kind of your quick thoughts on that, and probably, I don't say done with the receiver, but it's probably down to like maybe if they can flip Preston Bowman, maybe I don't know. There may be one more spot left.
Yeah, I will start with Philip Bell himself. 6'2", 195 was what you read in the database. You don't know for sure. I mean, the days of the verified events are in the past, not necessarily a case. I mean, we're talking about 15, 16, 17, 18-year-old kids who are still growing. So those numbers always kind of seem to be all over the board. But he picked Ohio State over USC, a Final Two, but he had all the offers that really mattered out there. So, and I said this in the Buckeye Weekly that we recorded after the Akron game, the night that Bell committed. A lot of people were maybe hung up on French and Decorian Moore and guys like that. But Philip Bell, I mean, don't sleep on what he's been able to do. He moved from Sacramento to Mission Viejo. Mission Viejo is a much more competitive program than Christian Brothers up in Sacramento. So a little, maybe going through a little bit of a learning curve. Somebody who's probably not going to come right in. He's not going to be Jeremiah that we're immediately on watch day one. He's going to be somebody who's going to take a little development time. But I think that Ohio State quietly has put together a nice little recruiting class. And to Mark's point, yeah, maybe one more. Preston Bowman is somebody I would certainly keep an eye on. But I saw Preston after week one of the Ohio high school football season. Tough loss to St. Ed's, lost 28-0. He really wasn't in the mood to talk. He's like, no, I'm still fully committed to Kentucky. I didn't expect him to open up and give me, his life story at that point after a very difficult loss.
Yeah, I think obviously Preston Bowman will be a guy they continue to build a relationship with. So we'll see how that goes. I know certainly Preston Bowman's going to want to feel the love from Ohio State after maybe feeling a little bit snubbed, not getting the offer until he committed to Kentucky. And then Ohio State obviously is going to be evaluating senior film as well of players like Preston Bowman. So these are kind of a two-way street here. But I think Philip Bell's a great pickup. I've kind of been quietly hoping he would be in the class. We kept talking about him throughout the spring and summer. Is Ohio State all in on him? Are they not? What if they get Decorian Moore? And so there were so many kind of ups and downs, I think, with Philip Bell in terms of kind of where he would fit into things. And now it all worked out. And I think that's a really big pickup. Unfortunately, I think what's going to happen here this year is Jeremiah Smith is going to forever taint the patience levels of people with true freshman receivers, because I think we're about to see something very special out of JJ this fall. And I don't think we can apply that to really any receiver that I've ever seen them land in the past or even in the future. Because the next thing I can already hear it. There's always some subtleties being thrown out there is, well, Chris Henry Jr. is a 5-star and he's ranked number 1 in the country, and maybe he's going to, no. I think what you're about to see with JJ is going to be kind of a one-time deal. So let's be patient with some of these other guys. Really, really impressive what JJ did on Saturday. And I think, again, what he's doing right away here, I think is going to pay huge dividends for them in recruiting as they try and land guys, maybe another guy in 25, but as they try and land guys in 26 and 27, I think Jeremiah Smith's going to be one of those players that, when we start doing interviews on 27s and even getting into 28s, who I got a 28 to talk about here in a minute. But we're going to start hearing a lot about how they grew up watching Jeremiah Smith. And that's going to be the guy they want to be like. And so it's going to continue that trend where Ohio State's got a player that, has that kind of national appeal to young players. So we'll see what dividends that pays down the road. But I think he's going to be a lightning rod for a lot of the young receivers out there as they move forward here the next 4 or 5 years with recruiting. I guess I'll continue because you were at the game. You were at the Ohio State game on Saturday. I was in Cleveland, Lakewood, I guess, about 3 blocks, I think, from Cleveland. But Lakewood, St. Ed's, St. Joe's Prep, they huge, interstate game there. St. Joe's Prep, I thought, might have an advantage, even though this was their opener and St. Ed's had already played. I look at what St. Ed's had to replace from last year. They won another state championship last year and then promptly lost like that massive offensive line. You lost an edge guy. You went to Notre Dame. You lost some guys in the secondary. Like, you're playing more juniors this year than you're normally playing at St. Ed's. And wow, they whipped St. Joe's Prep. It ended up being like 35-21, I think was the final, but it wasn't that close. It was 28-0 at one point, then it was 28-7, then it was immediately 35-7. It was scoreless going into the second, and then about the mid-second quarter, it was an avalanche by St. Ed's, which, to Kevin's points talking about Preston Bowman, I think we looked last week, we're like, oh, like, Pick North couldn't score on St. Ed's after all St. Ed's lost and 28-0, and St. Ed's should be a team you can compete with earlier in the year because they're going to get better later in the year because they lost all this stuff. And why wasn't Pick North more competitive? Well, they did the same thing to St. Joe's Prep. So that says something about what St. Ed's has going on right now. But 3 players of Ohio State interest on St. Joe's Prep's roster, at least. Isaiah West, Ohio State running back commit. Isaiah had the first St. Joe's Prep touchdown, caught an 18-yard screen pass. Liked what I saw out of Isaiah. Again, St. Ed's dominated this game on both sides of the ball in the trenches. It was ugly. I mean, they were very aggressive in blitzing St. Joe's. St. Joe's has a young quarterback and just kind of overwhelmed the St. Joe's offensive line as well. And just it was a tough deal for them up front. But Isaiah, I thought, maximized his carries, maximized his yardage, wasn't leaving yards out there. A little more powerful than I expected. A lot of finishing runs strong, falling forward, good balance, good burst. So good out of the backfield, was able to catch a few balls. So that's another element I think he'll bring to Ohio State. So was pretty impressed with him overall, as impressed as you can be in a game where his team got blown out and didn't really do much. Max Roy did not play. He is dealing, he doesn't kind of want to really talk about it, doesn't really want it out there. He's dealing with a bit of an injury right now, so he's kind of week to week at the moment. They're going to be overly cautious with him, but he's week to week. No timetable on that yet. We'll see how this goes for him here this year in terms of how much he's going to play. So that's kind of TBD. And Jet Harrison, our first look, his first varsity game, his first start. He had 4 catches. Was a varsity starter as a freshman at St. Joe's Prep, which I don't want to say has never been done. That would probably be a stretch. I would guess someone has done it, but it's high. Let's put it this way: it's highly unusual to roll out the first week of the season as a freshman starter at St. Joe's Prep. So he looks the part. He looks about 6'1.5", 6'2" right now. So he's not quite as tall as Marvin ended up being yet, but he's taller than his dad already. So He's somewhere in between right now. We'll see kind of what his growth spurt looks like. He looks young, which is always good. It means there's kind of more growth left there. He looks like young in the face and everything else. He's going to fill out quite a bit, but he was going against a couple of really good St. Ed's corners, guys who are juniors who are probably going to be D1 guys. Well, definitely going to be D1 guys down the road. So was able to make a few plays, made a really nice catch along the sidelines. I'll have some clips of that here this week, but that was kind of it. Talk to Max and Isaiah, particularly after the game. They're very solid with Ohio State. No concerns there. And obviously Jet, has the in with through Marvin and just knowing all the coaches and everything. So Ohio State will be a very tough out, I think, once that offer comes through, and everyone around the program thinks it's coming. At St. Joe's Prep, the buzz around him is pretty real. So looks the part to me. Not just getting the hype because of his last name. I thought he looked good out there. So it'd be fun to track him. Let's get to questions.
Yeah, we'll get to some of the questions, and here we go. Flu, I know Mark has said a million times that Naeem offered would be a fight till the end. What confidence level?
Not super high. Let's go 1 to 10. From 1 to 10, 1 is he's definitely flipping. 10 is he's definitely sticking. I'm probably at a 5 or a 6 right now at best. And the fact that this is kind of playing out the way I was told to watch for, the day he committed, I had people tell me, watch for Auburn, watch Auburn. This is going to be very tense, very stressful for Ohio State down the stretch. Wait till the season starts. There's no pressure on Auburn or Naeem yet there's no pressure on Auburn to really ratchet it up yet. There's no pressure on Naeem to, have to like spurn Auburn yet. Like, let's see where this thing's at. And kind of like October, November. Well, here we are now at the beginning of September and it's happening. So, I'm my 5 or 6 is just really giving Tim Walton a lot of respect for how well he's done with this recruitment in general. Just the type of recruiter he is and just the relationship we know those two have. And Naeem has told Ohio State about the visits he's been making. I don't think they love it, but at least he's telling them they're not finding out on Twitter like the rest of us or anything like that. So I'll put it there for now, but yeah, it's not great. And again, it's the fact that this was what I was told to watch for. It wasn't like, oh, he's going to go to Texas or USC or even Alabama. It was watch Auburn. And here we are now. Auburn seems to be the school that is the biggest threat. Obviously, Oregon's in there as well.
Well, and you add to it, Auburn had a big recruiting weekend here recently. They, what's the kid's name? He decommitted from Miami, the linebacker.
Elijah Melendez.
Yep. Elijah Melendez, and now he's being kind of talked about going to Auburn. Mm-hmm. It certainly seems as if Auburn is pushing its chips into the middle of the table to try and put something together. I mean, love him or hate him with where things were with Hugh Freeze when he was at Ole Miss and then Liberty, but I mean he is a hell of a recruiter, and I think Ole Miss boosters see an opportunity right now that if they don't try to reassert a little bit of dominance, that they could get swallowed back up by Alabama again and go through 3 or 4 more coaches. So I think that anything that Auburn is doing right now should be considered a threat.
Saban left a power vacuum. And we've kind of talked about this in regards to several different players from, Micah Deos to Zion Grady to Naeem Offord. And what's happening is essentially you've got 2 very desperate schools in Alabama. Alabama, it sounds silly to call Alabama desperate, but they are in the sense that Kalen DeBoer doesn't have like 3 years to ease into this. If he doesn't come out of the gates really strong on in the field and on the recruiting trail, the natives are going to get really bad because they're just, you want to talk about a spoiled fan base. I mean, they're not going to accept, 9-3s or not finishing in the top 5 in recruiting or letting players leave the state or even worse, going to Auburn. There is an enormous amount of pressure on Kalen DeBoer to endear himself very quickly. We've talked to high school coaches down there about this. High school coaches have always kind of told us the same thing. It's like, hey, nice enough guy, nothing against him or anything, but like hardly anyone on that staff has ties here to the state. Like, he doesn't have ties here. We don't know him yet. Like, we're like as curious as everybody else how this is going to play out for him. So there's an enormous amount of pressure there. There's an enormous amount of pressure on Auburn on 2 levels. 1, to be relevant again. They have not been relevant in a very long time now. And 2, I think they sense like, okay, Saban's gone. We have like a year to 24 months to like try and turn this in-state thing back in our favor. Because if DeBoer gets rolling, it could be another decade of, irrelevance. And so you're going to see all sorts of shenanigans here the last couple months on the recruiting trail, especially when it comes to protecting their home turf with someone like Naeem Offord. But that's what we've been warned about the entire time. So it's concerning. It's concerning if you're Ohio State, and we'll just have to, you take it week by week. They'd love to get him back up here as soon as possible. We'll see what that entails if that happens. But yeah, they know they're in a fight right now.
We've had a lot of conversation about Justin Fry and the state of offensive
line.
No
way.
I know. So I'll jump in just with Bradley Dunkel's comment, which, I think encapsulates the frustration where a lot of people are. 3 lineman class is unacceptable, though. And, I think that people are still pretty chapped about David Sanders going to Tennessee. And then I think there's also, and I'll jump to this as well, looking at the class of 26, that maybe that they haven't been as aggressive in state as people would like. And I know that in the last School Session Live Recruiting podcast, we did talk about some of the in-state guys like Guthrie that, where they stand in terms of their offers. So I think we can kind of merge all of these comments together to be able to have, the Justin Fry conversation, because I'll even add on top of it, people were unhappy with where the O-line play was in the Akron game. And let's not forget, Donovan Jackson was not in. They were still doing a little bit of auditioning between Tegra Shabola and with Carson Hinsman at the other guard position. I mean, Austin Saraveld, he had his moments where he was pretty solid. He had a couple moments where he struggled, but, kind of is what it is in week 1. But overall, Justin Fry, I guess, is what we'll throw this as.
Yeah, I mean, I've kind of said this in a few different ways, and I'll just repeat it, I guess. There's a list of criteria right now, how he finishes this recruiting class, making sure he's getting off to a good start in 26, and how the O-line plays this fall. I mean, those criteria have to be met. I think everyone in the building knows that over there. I don't think people are completely unaware and like, oh, well, there's nothing wrong with the offensive line and everything's perfect. Everything's just fine and just how we want it. But I think obviously this is a big 4 months for Fry. O-line's got to be a big part of things this year. If they want to win a national championship, the O-line's got to be really good. You've got, they had 3 new starters on the interior on Saturday. I'm not ready to go too nuts on that. Unfortunately, the schedule is pretty poor the first month of the season. So I don't know. I guess Iowa, we find out, right? Iowa's before Oregon, right? Iowa's
before Oregon, and Michigan State is before all of that. Michigan State is the first league game up in up in East Lansing, though. So
yeah, and I liked their hire. I think John Smith's really good. I watched them against Florida Atlantic. That was terrible on both sides. So I don't know. We'll see. You give Michigan State, a week or two, see if they're better. But let's see. Yeah, I don't know that we're going to know for sure, no matter how good or bad, if they're bad, that's going to be really bad. But even if they're good the next couple games, I don't know that we're going to know for sure until Iowa. But, it's going to be a big piece of the puzzle with Fry in terms of how he's evaluated. by Ryan Day. And ultimately, if the O-line doesn't play well this year and there's recruiting struggles and in finishing this class and then starting the next one, I mean, there's going to be some tough decisions to make some uncomfortable conversations at best this winter. So we'll see how that goes. Right now with recruiting with 25, they've put a lot of their eggs in the Micah Deos basket in terms of flipping him from Alabama. I'm not as optimistic as people around Ohio State are. And I talked to Tavian St. Clair about this. Obviously, we talked about that, I think, last week as well. Tavian St. Clair's talking to Micah, every day, every other day at least. He feels like they've got a shot. I know I've talked to people in the building that feel they've got a shot. I'm just skeptical. I think the Cleveland ties only go so far. I think the one angle that's interesting to me is, look, you had a sizable NIL package ready for David Sanders. Do you just kind of steer that now towards Micah Deos and that's going to get it done? I mean, maybe that, I think that might be their best shot is actually the NIL component rather than the Cleveland ties. Cause to me, he's been very much ingrained in the SEC culture. I mean, it was Alabama, LSU, and Ohio State. I mean, he wasn't looking to Penn. It's not like it was, they were fighting Penn State or Notre Dame or Michigan. The real contenders there were Ohio State, Alabama, LSU. I don't know. He feels like an SEC kid to me now, but again, you have this, call it cap space, I guess, in today's crazy world. And you had a very, very competitive and sizable NIL presentation package ready for David Sanders if you wanted it. And now you don't have anywhere to go with that. So, hey, let's see.
There's no cap, there's no basement, but if you sat there and you had X amount of dollars there, why are you going to sit there and try and fritter around? And I mean, obviously the less money you can spend and still get the guys, that's great. I mean, that's how it kind of works. But are you going to sit there and allow a couple bucks to be, to be the thing that keeps you from landing him at this point? And you got to make smart decisions with that. I mean, the thing too is that Ohio State is going to lose so many guys that are out of eligibility. And if it's a special season, I think you lose even more guys. So this quote unquote $20 million team, if you can keep bringing that type of money to the table year in and year out, you're going to have some money available to play around with. And that's kind of how it is. You got to recruit your juniors and seniors, but you got to also go out and recruit your recruits.
Yeah. So, I mean, we'll see. Do I love the fact that the only real name I'm hearing right now is Micah Deos? No. I think the net might need to go a little wider than that. And right now there's a reasonable level of confidence in Deos from the people I've talked to. And I'm not yet sharing that. I'm just kind of putting out there what the people I've talked to are saying. I'm not as optimistic yet, but we'll see. I'd like to see him show up for a game this fall. I know that. I mean, he had a good official in the summer. I know they do a great job with their officials. Very rarely do people walk away from officials and be like, oh, that wasn't very good. So, but I think they got to get him back. When that happens, I don't know yet. I know they're trying. They've got some opportunities here, particularly like in October with some big games, and obviously a big one there at the end of November that we all know about. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. Again, with the net and how it's being cast, there's no plan B for David Sanders, although Micah Deos looks like, doubling back on Micah maybe, but there's really no plan B you can just plug in for David Sanders. He's the best offensive tackle in the country. He's really one of the best offensive tackles I've seen come out of high school the last, 7-8 years. So it's hard to just kind of pivot off of that because whatever you pivot to is not going to be as good. So in a world where you don't get David Sanders, if they were able to flip to Deos, would be incredible. Very, very rarely would you be able to lose David Sanders and then replace him basically with like another 5-star guy? And it just, so we'll see. We'll see if they can pull it off.
I'm going to combine two again, both from Bradley, because these two fit together. LaCharles Bentley is the obvious candidate to fill Fry's shoes. Keeping Tim Drevno as the assistant O-line coach is a good call too, though. And punch up the next one. He'd be able to recruit like Hartline, Walton, and Laurinaitis as a Buckeye alum. Plus, he's got a laundry list of players who have camped, clinicked with him that are in the NFL thriving. I'm going to play bad cop here, and whether or not we're playing bad cop, or bad cop, good cop, or whatever, I'm only responsible for what I'm saying, and I'm probably going to regret what I'm saying because I'll probably lose some standing. Just because you are an alumni doesn't necessarily mean that you are going to be able to do what Hartline and Walt and Laurinaitis are doing. You very much are going to have the passion for the school, more than likely. I mean, there's some people that didn't necessarily have a great experience. I'm not saying LaCharles didn't have a great experience at Ohio State. But let's not forget, and we talked about this on the last show, and I think that there are going to be times, people watch one show and they don't watch the next show, but you should be sure to subscribe to this channel if you're watching us on YouTube at youtube.com/Buckeye Huddle. Hit that thumbs up, hit that bell, subscribe to the channel. Don't miss a single episode, not only of Skull Session Recruiting Podcast, but Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning, Buckeye Weekly, Big Meat Kickoff, if I ever get off my butt to do one of those. But the point I'm saying is that LaCharles was heavily involved in maybe one of the weakest offensive line classes that I can remember that didn't have just one person. And I'm referring to the Evan Blankenship class on that, which just only had one lineman. LaCharles was very involved with it, and several of those kids camped with him. And LaCharles kind of was like, yeah, no, you should recruit these kids. And Chris Carter, not the receiver, but the lineman, Antonio Underwood, Tommy Brown, Brian Bobeck. I mean, the class did not really have a tremendous impact at Ohio State. Now you could sit there and say, well, Charles is older and wiser. Maybe. But I am always very quick to say that just going to an alumni, going to a favorite player and saying, come on in and do this is it's not always the path to the situation, because you still got to get out there and connect with the kids. You still got to get out there and get the kids on campus, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you got to get the kids to close. And at the end of the day, I think that the name that I'm most interested in terms of helping close kids is Benjamin Franklin than anything, than LaCharles Bentley or Tim Drevno or whoever.
So I've got two things on that. To Kevin's point about the Tommy Brown, Underwood, Chris Carter class. Yes. I mean, that was being recommended. Those guys were all recommended to Bowman, who just, sure. Yeah. Offered them way early, at least early at that time. Maybe it wouldn't be as early in the process today, but back in the day, it was they were early offers. I think everyone knew at the time they were reaches. They clearly turned out to be. There's no doubt LaCharles was pushing those guys. Here's what I would say to that, and I've said this last week. When you're training people, when you own some type of, whether it's a gym or the guys who do the speed training, whoever it is, speed trainers, O-line trainers, whatever, quarterback coaches, quarterback trainers, these guys are incentivized to push these guys to college coaches. So you're not really just training them. Like, you're also like, it's kind of implied you're helping them find a landing spot. And the bigger the landing spot, the better. So if you took LaCharles out of that situation and brought him to Ohio State, where it's his ass is on the line, if he brings in kids that aren't good enough, he gets fired. He doesn't get fired if he sends kids to Ohio State or Notre Dame and they don't pan out. He still gets to train as a lineman, and he gets to tell all the young guys, hey, I sent all these guys to Notre Dame and Ohio State. So I think there would be a different dynamic there if he were at Ohio State and it was actually his job on the line to bring in the talent. I do think that'd be different. But I wouldn't be bringing him in to coach the offensive line, at least to be the offensive line coach. If he wanted to come in and do the Heartline thing for a couple of years, the Laurinaitis thing for a couple of years, if he wants to come in and assist, I think that would be a good resource to have. I would certainly not be against anything like that, but he's got no experience at that level of actually coaching. You bring in Chip Kelly, who has diverse run game schemes. How does that? You don't even know how that would work. Would LaCharles be able to teach it the way Chip wants it taught? Well, to do that, you would have to spend some time in the program first. You would have to spend a year or two working on that, and then finding out. You don't just throw that together and pray and hope that works. He would have there's a step or two that would need to be taken. And yes, I've heard the man speak. I've talked to him. I know LaCharles, so you're not telling me anything I don't know on how impressive he is as a person. But I'm not just randomly throwing him into the offensive line coach position. Like there's no chance. If he wants to come in GA for a year or two, I think that'd be great. But again, you have no idea how he meshes with Chip Kelly. And if you throw him in there and you find out it's not meshing well, that's a disaster. So let's get him in the program. If you want him around, get him involved in the program, let him assist for a year or two, evaluate off of that, and, figure that out, because there's a lot of guys who come in and GA for a year or two and you realize former Buckeyes and you realize, yeah, I don't think so. And, so the cream rises to the top on these types of situations where you get the GA, you get a bunch of GAs in there, and the guys who are really good, they kind of stand out, rise like Heartline. You were hearing about Heartline and Keenan Bailey like early, like everyone around them knew they were going to be really good assistant coaches. So I think, and Laurinaitis as well. You heard that at Notre Dame. You heard it, his year here before he got the official job. So I just think anytime we start talking about like the all-time OSU greats and coming back into coaching, they have to spend a year or two in the program, kind of earning their stripes in a different profession, making sure they are a fit with the coaches that are already on staff that you want to keep, unless you're going to run Chip Kelly out too already. I don't think you want to do that. So it just has to, you can't just throw it together and hope it's going to work. You just have to give it a year or two, make sure that person's going to fit in your program.
And let's remember as well that people who are talking about, a lot of the people who are talking about Fry at this moment were saying this last week. So it has less to do with what we saw on the field with no Donovan Jackson, as I said, no, the little flip-flopping at the other guard position, just with, I think people are frustrated with where offensive line recruiting is. But when we get to 26, and, again, we're repeating ourselves, but there is a core of Ohio offensive linemen. Deron Parks is just across the state line in West Virginia. You got you've got Champ Smith in Florida. I mean, Ohio State is lined up, barring spitting the bit, and not saying that Ohio State is not incapable of spitting the bit, but they should have a really solid class. Now, if the line play in 24 costs Ohio State a shot at the playoffs or knocks them out of the playoffs early or whatever, then, I think there's going to have to be a lot of internal evaluation and everything else. But I'll tell you what's not great for recruiting: constant changes at the coaching position. It's about relationships. I saw somebody talk about that in the chat, and as I'm talking, I'm not reading the chat, so I'm sorry that I'm not punching your things up, but you have to have those relationships. It sometimes takes you, especially if you go and get somebody outside of the game. If LaCharles is still doing his academy or whatever, he's not talking to a lot of these kids. He may be talking to some of the in-state kids, but you're not necessarily out there building those relationships elsewhere. So the grass isn't always greener on the other side. And let me end this with saying, I also know LaCharles. I also have been up to his event. I did a big story up there during the time that he was training the class that we talked about. So, I mean, I know what makes LaCharles tick. I've had, long conversation with him. I like the guy. I really like the guy. I think he could be successful, but it's to Mark's point, you can't just sit there and place him in the system and say, all right, now go, with no background, none of that other type of stuff. That just does not work. I can tell you that right now. That part of the formula does not work.
Super chat. Thank you, Ryan. It feels silly asking, but screw it. Will the Iowa game be a big recruiting weekend? Yeah, I mean, I think so. We don't have, these lists start to come together really a week or two out. But yeah, I think that's going to be one they target. Obviously, the game's the end of November. We all know about that. That will be the biggest. But yeah, I think Iowa is well timed during the season as far as, you're getting kind of a break between where you go out to Oregon and kind of things really hit the fan. You get, Michigan game late in the year. It's a good kind of midpoint of the season to bring in a big weekend list. And yes, I think that'll be one they absolutely target as one of their big weekends. Do we know what time that kicks, by the way, Kevin?
We do not.
Is that still one of the unknown? Yeah.
Well, most of them are unknowns and will be in that 14 or 6-day window type of situation. And with Ohio State having an open week 3, we were that much more delayed in knowing when Michigan State is going to be as a road game. But Ohio State has 8 home, 4 road games. And unfortunately, a lot of the home games are not super exciting, not named Michigan. I mean, to be honest. And then I think Iowa kind of fits the bill for a good opportunity. There's an outside chance I think that could maybe be a night game. I don't know. And there's a lot to it, but Chris Henry Jr. was on campus for the Akron game. So there are also going to be times where guys just come on campus because they have the ability to, or that's the game they want to see. I mean, I think with Chris Henry, he certainly has some means with Pac-Man Dad to do, to get out to some things, but it's not always a case of where, oh my God, you have to have 1 versus 2, 1 versus 4, 2 versus 5 in the national rankings. You can still have a tremendous recruiting weekend. I personally, with it being, and it wasn't even as hot as it was earlier in the week, it was miserable. It was miserable at the Ohio State game. It was so muggy. It was so much humidity. I felt like I was in South Louisiana.
Yeah, and look, you've got a bye week in September. You've got Western Michigan and Marshall are what's left at home. So they're going to want guys in for that Iowa game. And look, I know we all make fun of Iowa's offense, and who knows, they may lose to Iowa State this weekend. You never know in that game, but they also may be a top 20 team, top 15 team that week. If they're able to 9-6 and 13-10 their way into a 5-0 or a 6-0, whatever they would be at that point. So it's not out of the realm of possibility. That's going to be a big one.
And how about Nebraska as a big recruiting weekend? I mean, that's something else.
If it's a night game, and again, that's the networks. I saw something about it being homecoming for Iowa. I don't think the networks unfortunately care about that.
Traditionally, homecoming was earlier, but I did some research, and again, maybe I'm dreaming this up, and that happens at times, but I've seen homecoming listed at other times as well. I mean, let's be honest. How many people are going to the homecoming parade all that often and doing all of that stuff? I moved away from Columbus for 7 years and never came back for a homecoming because I never, it's not like Revenge of the Nerds and the homecoming game for Adams College or whatever. And I mean, it's just putting a label on something. I mean, it's, you have alumni band, you have Military Heroes Day. I mean, you have these days that you check off the list. And to me, homecoming is just another thing that you check off the list. I don't really feel that there's anything different, except for maybe halftime just feels longer because you're having to introduce like 800 members of the homecoming court.
Well, I just go back to the networks want the best return on their massive investment they've put into these TV contracts, so whatever time they want you to kick off at that point, it's part of the draft or whatever too, right? You get the certain, right of first refusal or whatever on some of these games. And so we'll see. We'll see when these games kick. We're as interested as you guys are in some of these. Night games are always easier for Ohio State to get guys on campus. Can you think about a kid from Florida or Texas? He's not even stepping out of his high school locker room on Friday night until 11:30, in some cases. Trying to get transportation, whether it's a super early flight, which can always have delays or cancellations, and then trying to get from the airport to the game in time. So when you can get these night games announced, whenever they're going to be, that also helps you get kids. And, to Kevin's point earlier about like Chris Henry Jr., sometimes it's simply, this is when I can get here. And it's not like, yeah, I'd love to go to the Michigan game or I'd love to go to the Iowa game, but I have to come to the Marshall game. This is my team plays on those Saturdays, my whatever it is. So, but I suspect there will be plenty of opportunities this fall once we get through the September months. I mean, we'll kind of be hit and miss, I think, for Western Michigan, Marshall. There may be some big names, that can only get there at those times. But I think they're going to steer a lot of guys toward the Big Ten games and forward. So they'll have a lot of opportunities to get guys on campus, as Kevin said, with the 8 home games, and the one at the end will be the biggest.
And before we get to Micah's question, I'll say this. Let's not forget that when it comes to a lot of officials, a lot of those have already occurred because that's just how things are. So, yeah, they're going to be guys who are going to want to come out and see the game experience and everything else. But conversely, you've had a lot of guys already do their officials. And, so we're talking about needing night games so you can have your kids from California or Texas or wherever get out there. I mean, those are also going to be unofficials for those kids at that point if they've already done that. So the recruiting algebra continues to change a little bit as the calendar changes and the rules change. And, when Mark and I both started in this industry, it was a completely different animal of how the calendar set up. And, it didn't get in during the season, that's fine. I want to come in the week after the season. There wasn't a conference championship game at that point, but I can come in and the coaches can spend more time with me and not be busy preparing for a game, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and like to the point about the unofficials, that's its own little monster. Like, you want to get the young kids, like the juniors, the sophomores, up and let them see things, let them experience things at Ohio Stadium, the atmosphere, and a game day around Columbus. But for guys that you're like really serious about, either those juniors you're hoping to close this offseason or even a senior you're trying to close now, coming up for 3.5 hours and watching it's not like Ryan Day can be hanging out with Micah Deos during the game. I mean, he's got game prep and then he's got the game. So you're hoping, and they've got to do this on their own dime. You're hoping let's say if it's a night game, you're hoping they spend the night Saturday and they fly back Sunday night so they can come over to the facility on Sunday and you can spend some actual time with them. So that's another thing, especially when you're dealing with the seniors. People have already used their officials and guys you're trying to get late in the game, is just trying to get them on a weekend at a time when they will be able to either come in. Maybe if it's a night game, come in early Saturday morning, or if it's coming back Sunday to the facility and then flying home Sunday night, or else, yeah, it's great. They came in, they got some free tickets and they got to watch a cool game, but how much time did you actually get to spend with them as you try to flip them or you try to land them? So these are all things that are considered when we talk about fall visits.
For those of you watching, sorry that I popped off. My browser crashed, but I'm back now. So, for those of you listening on any of your favorite podcasting channels, you didn't know that I went anywhere, I guess. Micah Hanna, I've got the feeling that the team up north and Rutgers are telling Peyton Cook he can stay a wide receiver. Thoughts? I know he played quarterback too. I've
seen quite a bit of Peyton. I think he's a really good prospect. I think he'd be a really good safety. He is, to me, has not been as dynamic as kind of what Hartline has set the standard as a receiver. So I think that's a decision that's going to be a tough one for Ohio State to make. What do they do there? Is it as a receiver? Is it as a defensive back? I'm not going to sit here and say definitely should offer him as a receiver. I just haven't seen that out of him yet. Now, he doesn't really play in an offense that throws it a ton either, which I think also can hinder him at times. But my instinct in seeing him a few times is that I think I like him better at safety. That's just defensive back is just with his length and size and athleticism. But
I want to jump to this one. I have a couple more in the queue, but the Ohio podcast, just another reason why there should be more of an emphasis on recruiting more in-state talent. Now, if there was a preceding message to kind of set a little bit to it, then I'm sorry that I missed it, but I'm going to say this. You guys are putting me in a position where I'm getting to be the freaking negative guy or whatever. They did have a big emphasis on recruiting in-state under Jim Tressel, and they won a lot of games. They did, but Jim Tressel had to kind of change that a little bit of how he was recruiting. And when he sat there and Ohio State made it to the BCS championship games in 6 and 7, we'd already seen a bit of a change in how that is. But you can't sit there and say we're going to put more emphasis on recruiting the state of Ohio if they're not kids in the state of Ohio. And there's generally been a pretty big difference in terms of what, you're always going to have your top 3, 4, 5 kids in Ohio, but under Tressel, I think that the number of kids that maybe were Buckeye worthy, or at least Buckeye offer worthy under Tressel for what he was trying to do, went deeper than where we had been recently within the state of Ohio, population shifts and everything else. I think 26 is, 26 is going to shape up to be a pretty good year within the state. Maybe you're able to recruit in-state a little bit more. I mean, maybe sometimes it's a little bit harder to back the truck up if you're used to not recruiting as much in the state of Ohio. But I don't think that you can just sit there and say, well, we're going to recruit the state of Ohio and we're going to put some sort of, and I'm not putting words in the Ohio podcast mouth. I promise you, I don't want that to be the case, but we want to make sure that 50% of our class is from the state of Ohio. You can't do that. You've got to go to where the talent is and the talent that wants to go there. I mean, there are going to still be the people who are upset about, Trey McNutt getting away and everything else, and Dorian Brew. I mean, even though he was in Texas, moved to Texas, still really being an Ohio kid. Ohio State's been going into other states for years and recruiting best kids out of there. I mean, it's how it works.
Ohio State's in a unique situation, probably more unique than just about anywhere. I mean, maybe Penn State would be the closest situation to Ohio State, where you're in a state that produces a lot of FBS talent, but not to the point where you can take like 70% of your kids from in-state. I think even in a good year, probably 50% is about what you're going to take. But this has become such a national sport. Population shifts
are real.
When I started doing this, there was hardly any talent in North Carolina. Now they have like 3 5-star defensive linemen every year in North Carolina. It's crazy. Like North Carolina's blowing up. Georgia has went even crazier than it's always been a good state. It's now for me, it's the best state to recruit.
States are passing California, in my opinion, to be quite honest.
So Ohio State's in this weird place where they have to keep the natives happy, and they do have to recruit Ohio hard. But if you get too focused, you get too tunnel vision on that, you lose kind of the big picture of how, are these kids going to help us beat Alabama? Are they going to help us beat Georgia? Are they going to help us beat Texas? Because if the answer to that is no, then you got to go where those guys are. And so they have to Ohio State has to constantly strike this balance, unlike really hardly any other program. Like every other program knows, like Georgia, we're going to recruit Georgia, Alabama, Florida. That's all they really need to do. And yeah, we can cherry pick a kid from New Jersey or Philly or something. Like if there's a 5-star kid, we can do that. But like, we don't have to get 10 kids from the Northeast or Midwest. And if you're a school like Notre Dame, you have to recruit nationally. If you're a school like even Michigan, I think you have to recruit nationally. Ohio State's in that weird, like, we got to do both. And so every year I think you have to assess things, and you can't abandon Ohio. Yes, you have to 1000% make sure you're doing your diligence in Ohio. I think with the scholarship increase, that may open up some more opportunities for a few more developmental guys from Ohio each year, which I think will be good. But it's just a tough one.
Ohio podcast with a follow-up, and I promise I'll get to a couple of other questions, but I thought this was a very valid question. So follow-up question, do you agree or disagree that a recruit who understands the rivalry is an important aspect of finding, quote unquote, the right fit with a recruit? Football players, I think your top-end football players are going to want to get out there and win games regardless. I think that you do need to have a mixture of some guys in there that understand and can, talk to their boys and be like, I've hated these fools for 18 years. I mean, this is really important. But I also don't buy into, well, there were just too many guys that didn't understand the rivalry. Well, I mean, if you come in flat for a game that is generally top 25 versus top 25, top 15 versus top 15, whatever, maybe you weren't all that good to begin with as a player. So I don't get too caught up in needing to have all of these guys that understand the rivalry. I think there are too many hooks back to when John Cooper took the head coaching job, and he kind of undersold the rivalry and then subsequently did very poorly in the rivalry, 2-10-1, and that there's still a lot of belief that is the case. And I don't know. I'll tell you this. 3 games that I've seen that Ohio State has been on the wrong end of here recently against that team up north, I've not walked out of there. It's like, if only they had 10 more Ohioans on the team. That has not been anywhere on my list.
I think that if you're going to recruit nationally, as Ohio State does, I do think it's important that once they arrive, they are immediately, and I think this really should start, and it does, with the recruiting process. We don't like those guys, but I don't think it necessarily look, how many guys did Urban Meyer bring in who would fit the definition of maybe not understanding the rivalry as a high school player? Like, did Jeff Okuda or Sean Wade or Chase Young understand the rivalry? I mean, like, I don't know that those guys, even like a Terry McLaurin, did he understand? Like, I don't know. I just think it's the coach's job. It's the program's job. The all involved in the program is to make that rivalry a focal point and to, ingrain that into who they recruit, no matter where they're from. I think Urban Meyer did a great job of that. So I think a lot of it falls on the environment of, this game is the most important game we're going to play this year, every year, no matter what. And again, Urban was able to have a lot of success in that game, all the success in that game, by kind of having that be the environment. So that's kind of my answer.
Tamara Burley, if they're using Jeremiah Smith as a recruiting tool, they're using Jeremiah Smith as a recruiting tool. Look, if you're this good, you can be starting. That's why they put a lot of young guys in. And, to quote Mark, Jeremiah is an alien. I mean, and he is. I mean, he's just so different, but it certainly doesn't hurt to be able to land these guys and then coach them up. And I mean, maybe you're not necessarily going to be able to say what the difference of Jeremiah at Chaminade Madonna was. I mean, he's going to, fill out a little bit more and get bigger in a collegiate weight program than he was going to do at high school. I mean, Chaminade Madonna is a fantastic program. Don't get me wrong. I'm not taking anything away from there. I've been on that campus at least 10 times. But you absolutely use these types of guys as a recruiting tool. I mean, you got to use everything you can to try and separate yourselves. But I'll tell you what, Ohio State doesn't need a lot of smoke and mirrors to push its wide receiver recruiting. Let me get here to the next one.
There's one more follow up there from the Ohio podcast.
All right, I saw it. Here it is.
Yeah. So, yeah, basically my take is that the Ohio podcast. My take is that if you're going to take a low 4-star from out of state, why not go? I assume after a high 3-star in-state kid. And look, ties. Ties go to the runner. Ties should go to the Ohio kid. There's zero doubt in my mind about that. If the talent or potential is equal, you take the Ohio kid. I mean, there's no argument from me there. It's striking the balance because you have to recruit kids that are good enough to line up and beat the Georgias and Texases of the world, and Michigan, of course. But so there's this balance of, okay, does Ohio have enough of them this year? Because I know people hate losing to Michigan. They also hated the reputation Ohio State got about 20 years ago for getting blown out by SEC teams. And so it's a constant balancing act of your culture, of recruiting, where to go for recruits. It's not, I think Ohio State's a very unique job because I just think almost every other powerhouse in the country knows exactly, where they're recruiting every year. Whereas Ohio State has to kind of, adjust a little bit based on what Ohio is going to give them and kind of what their class size is.
You can jump here to Stephen Sherry, and then I'll get to Mike Ferguson, then I'll get back in. I got a couple more. Half of the Rivals team is from Ohio. Ohio recruits matter. The team up north does not recruit Ohio that much. I mean, and first and foremost, they're not going to be a lot of times the team up north is going to beat Ohio State out for an Ohio kid. I mean, people will be quick to point out, Jordan Marshall or whatever, but I mean, and then sometimes they're going to be the kids that maybe Ohio State just couldn't figure out how it could get into the class, a Rod Moore or somebody. But this isn't Lloyd Carr. This isn't.
No, it's not Desmond Howard and those guys and all the Ohio kids burning them. So it's not them at all.
I have to disagree with Steven here. It's not half, because certainly under Harbaugh for most of the time, and even his predecessor, they got away from recruiting Ohio. Now, was part of it a case of what I said earlier? Ohio was not as strong of a state in terms of the depth of its talent, or was it that? Was it just a strategic thing under Harbaugh? They recruited the Northeast, the New England states. I mean, Massachusetts and Connecticut and places like that. That's where they really went to make their bones, in addition to Florida and Georgia and some other places like that. But no, unless there's a different rival that I'm not thinking of, like unless Akron is a rival, nobody is half Ohio. We did that one. Here we go with Hollywood Hager. Are there any more offensive linemen in 25 that we can go after besides the ones that we're already in on? I mean, I know I was talking with my buddy Marcus Hartman from the Dayton Daily News, and I think he was talking about that there's like a lineman that's committed to Purdue at Centerville, but he's a project. He's like a he's raw, but maybe he's somebody you go after and you sign and stash. And I was going to say redshirt them, but there still are red shirts in college football, and you redshirt them and see if you can grow them as you go from 85 to 105. But I don't know if there's anybody in state. Mark would know significantly better than me. I don't think there's anybody that's plug and play that's out there that they're necessarily really going after, have that relationship with. I mean, I'm sure there people could go through one of the services, top 100, 250, whatever, and be like, what about him? What about him? What about him? I just, it's not necessarily how it works.
Yeah. Like Kevin said, they're going to probably evaluate the kid at Centerville. They're going to evaluate Nolan Davenport's committed to Wisconsin. I want people, unless they can flip Micah Deos, which is obviously what they're trying to do right now. I think people's expectations of what they're possibly going to replace David Sanders with probably need to be lowered a little bit, unless it's Deos, because you're just not going to. It's not going to be an apples to apples. But I would certainly look into bringing in maybe one in-state project even if they flip to Bose, you're going to get this scholarship bump. As I've been saying probably for a year and a half now, or at least a year, this is going to be a portal off season for the offensive line, whether it's a plug and play starter, whether it's a sixth or seventh man for some depth. They're going to need to go to the portal, and they were going to need to do this anyway, regardless of who they sign in 25. They probably need to go find themselves a portal offensive lineman,
or
two, but certainly one, and so that'll help bridge the gap a little bit. 26 is so important, as I've said. It's been teed up so perfectly for Justin Fry that, I want to say if he doesn't have a great 26 class, there's something incredibly wrong, but it's not just that. He's got to start strong in 26. If they don't have an offensive line commitment in 26 by the middle of January, it's going to be a head scratch. You got, Few in State you've offered. You got Parks. Champ Smith seems dying to be a Buck. I talk to Champ all the time. He loves Ohio State. You have 6 guys right now kind of teed up on a platter for you. If you don't get one or two of these guys at least in the fold early, what are we doing? And I think that's going to be evaluated. When I talk about the criteria that Ryan Day is going to look at on the field and in recruiting, again, it's not just how did you finish 25. I think it's going to be how are we looking in 26 right now? Do we have any commitments? Are these guys on the verge of committing? Have we lost ground with Will Conroy, for example? Why do we have 6 guys who kind of got their offer and are dying to be Buckeyes and none of them are committed? I think that's going to be something that also factors into things in December and January. If they don't have any commits, they should have a couple of these guys in the fold early. There's really no reason not to.
Mike Ferguson, can we introduce Ryan Day to It's Time for War? This, obviously the song, a little bit of difference in how things were in, for Rivalry Week. Urban Meyer had that song on loop 24 hours a day throughout the entire week. I mean, it was a very different, vibe under Urban. I think some people are concerned that maybe things have gotten a little too relaxed under Ryan. They hated the dancing that they saw out pregame and everything else, love each other. I mean, I know that's Tom Allen's thing, but Ohio's tough love, I guess, was the thing for Ohio State. I think that I do think that maybe they need to ratchet it up a little bit. I don't know if they need to go full maniacal of where maybe it was, but if Ryan's at a 3 and Urban was an 11, I think I'm okay with a 7. I mean, I'm not spending any time inside the, behind the ropes at the Woody. I mean, I go and do my interviews and everything else, but I mean, I'm not there hearing it for 700 times over the course of a week. But, I agree to a certain point with what Mike's saying there. Let's go on here. Mika Hanna would like to know what's up with Braylon Newcomb.
Yeah. So he won't be an Ohio State kid, at least as a scholarship guy. He's pretty small, 5'8" maybe. Heck of a player, very, very quick, very shifty, great body control, great hands. I think he would be a great fit for a MAC school. I think they'd be getting kind of a steal there, but I don't foresee Ohio, unless again preferred walk-on opportunity for sure. That'd be a prime candidate for a preferred walk-on opportunity.
Getting back to the questions here, we already hit that one. Let's go back.
And that's Tavian St. Clair's teammate at Bell Fountain that's being asked about.
Bradley, our offensive line needs to progress week to week, but I liked what I saw as far as first half to second half production and not missing assignments and mental errors. And Marcus had a chance to watch it on TV, but remember he was at the St. Joe's St. Ed's game over the weekend during that. I was at the game. I've done one rewatch of it. I did see some adjustments that I liked. I mean, I think that what Chip is trying to do, I mean, it was a combination in that game of staying relatively vanilla, but also trying to maybe change what some of your core philosophies are. And I came out of the stadium, hot and tired and kind of irritable about how the offensive line played. And I went back and watched it on TV, and there are times where I've seen guys who will not be named were blocking nobody, and some problems with that. But I think that their schedule sets up so well for them to be able to make these changes. And I know Ryan said post game that they're hoping to get a full week of practice out of Donovan Jackson, but it would really make a lot of sense if he's dinged up and them playing Western, who they're a 39-point favorite over, and then having an open week the following week. Let's see him get up to speed in Marshall and go there. There's no reason to get behind the 8 ball by trying to get somebody out there so early to go and play a non-conference game against a lower division MAC opponent.
Yeah, and I think I wanted to touch on that earlier because I think one of the first comments we got was about Simon and Jackson. And I don't think either of these injuries are long-term, but I also don't think they're going to play those guys even at, like, why would you play Simon? Let's say Cody's 90% this week. Do you play him at 90% against Western Michigan with a bye coming? And then you get him really healthy. And when you got Hicks and Styles out there flying around making tackles, like you've got some Arvell Reese, you've got some depth there this year.
That Arvell Reese should probably be starting. Yeah. I mean, based on 4 quarters of football.
Right. I mean, like once upon a time, Cade Stover was moving the linebacker for the Rose Bowl to try and get someone out there who can make a tackle. And, now they've got all these athletes out there. And so they're going to be overly cautious with these guys because you got to have them healthy for Iowa. That Iowa-Oregon stretch is going to be really competitive, physical. Like, you don't want this to linger. So I have no long-term concerns about either of those guys health-wise, but I also don't really care if they play the next couple weeks. I mean, Marshall included, if they come back from Michigan State, to me would be ideal. But that now telling a veteran like Cody Simon or Donovan Jackson, we know you're 95% this week, but we're going to hold you out. Wait till Michigan State. That's probably not realistic. They're probably going to force their way back out there somehow. But I'm just not concerned about them sitting out a few weeks.
Another one from Bradley Dunkel. We can't string along these 26 Ohio linemen by not offering because we think they might commit right away, thinking their commitment could potentially hinder us from getting tier 1 guys. Now, I think there's some questions about the guys that may not have offers yet. Now, if you do have an offer, if you're Ohio State and you offer an Ohio kid, that means you have to be ready to accept it at that point. So I don't think that anybody who's been offered is being strung along. I mean, maybe Ohio State hasn't been able to close at that point, but I understand what you're saying. And again, offensive line is by far the most difficult position to accurately project. There's just so much that goes into it. So I don't even attempt to say that I know specifically this guy versus that guy, but I think Ohio State very simply could have a class of Ohio kids, as to Mark's point, Ohio kids, Deron Parks, and Champ Smith. I mean, and maybe then go big fish hunting for one more, just
Iheanacho out of Maryland. Yep. No, look, they've offered 3, plus Parks, who's right across the river. I know everyone wants them to offer Guthrie. I wouldn't be against them offering Guthrie. I also know that Adam plays small school competition, is still the more raw of the 4 Ohio guys that we talk about prominently, and has literally just started his junior year. So I think they want to see some junior tape. I think they want to see a few games of junior film. If we're sitting here a month from now, they haven't offered Guthrie. It's like, okay, are you getting to the point where you need to either decide to offer him or walk away? That may be a discussion to have in a month or so. But they need to close on what they've got offered right now. Like, they can offer 20 more kids. They want to spray 10 BS offers in Florida, 10 BS offers in Georgia just to say they did it. That's fine with me. But you've got Champ Smith you lead for. You've got Deron Parks you lead for. You've got 3 offers in Ohio, plus you've got Guthrie. why, if you can't close on those guys, you're not closing on the BS offers from Georgia and Florida then. I mean, if you can't close on the guys who want to be here, who have you in the lead when the recruiting process starts, then I don't, that's the key to me in 26. You have to get the guy, you've prioritized these guys who are all like top 100 caliber prospects, by the way. Like, go land those guys. Like, don't, anything else is, to me, is just noise. Land the guys that you've prioritized, who are elite talents, who really like Ohio State. Go close the deal. And that's what this is going to be all about in 26. Because if they don't close on those guys, I don't see how they're going to have a great offensive line class. If you can't close on the guys you lead for.
Yeah, if you can't close on the guys in state that you lead for that are offered, I mean, that there's no, I mean, outside of Guthrie, I mean, the other three are offered, I don't know. You can't put it on a T any better than that at that point. I mean, it is what it is. I know there are a lot more questions that are just in the chat. That's everything that I had marked. Anything from, who maybe they had on campus this weekend for the game. I know that we're still trying to catch up with some people and everything else. But again, Chris Henry, not only was Chris Henry there, but I saw him on the Jumbotron. I saw him on TV. I mean, so there was no doubt that Chris Henry was there.
Modern Day. Yep. He had a few Modern Day guys there. Look, they're hoping they have tried so hard to break in at Modern Day. And I'm sorry if they signed just Chris in 26. I'm not going to say they broke into Modern Day. He was committed before he even got there. I would just kind of repeat my thing on Chris would be, yes, he's going to take visits. Relax. There, as long as Hartline's there, this will be Jeremiah Smith 2.0. This will be all for nothing. Everyone will forget about. No one's remembering Jeremiah Smith's visits to Miami and Florida now. He's out there scoring touchdowns. That's what this will be. But they are really hoping Chris can help them with. Again, Modern Day's got another great class coming up in 26. They got a bunch of really good players. They are hoping that Chris's presence out there will help them. I think it's going to help them get kids on campus more. And they've had a few guys, like they got Jordan Davis on campus quite a bit, but some guys they haven't had to get on camp. They haven't been able to get on campus.
They got like Rajon Davis on campus, the linebacker.
Yeah.
I mean, they
wanted the Baker kid to visit more. They couldn't really get that to happen. Like there's been kids like they just haven't got like the 3 to 4 visits you want to get out of them. And not only with Chris being there, can he kind of talk to them, but as far as like the rules, they're friends, they're high school teammates. I'm pretty sure Uncle Pat can just fly as many of those kids out to Columbus as he wants to, and I think that's all fair. So this may provide them an opportunity to get these guys on campus more as Chris comes back and wants to bring his buddies. So they're just hoping that was kind of my takeaway from like week one is like, okay, yes, okay, Philip Bell, great, awesome, huge pickup. Great player, but then also like, okay, can they finally, like with these 26s from Modern Day, can they finally break through there? So that'll be something to watch, I think, throughout the season and into the spring is how often we get those guys. We see those guys in Columbus.
I know the vast majority of the comments, are in like, are either the offensive line needs to play better, the offensive line needs to recruit better, or LaCharles Bentley. We kind of hit on a couple of those things at this point. I don't think that anybody's disagreeing how important offensive line plays. It's a line-driven game, everything else. I think you go back and you look at so much of what Ohio State did in that Akron game, especially after, maybe stumbling a little bit, only putting up 17 points in the first half. Things started to kind of come together. I mean, we haven't even really talked about the defense, but this is a recruiting show. But we're only a couple years removed from everybody freaking out that Ohio State couldn't recruit defensively and, just wait until they can show it on the field. Well, they're showing it on the field right now, and I think that the class certainly, matches up there. I think Micah asked a couple 20 minutes ago, any plans, for a Zahir Mathis visit? I haven't heard anything on that. I don't know if you've talked to him.
I don't have a date at this point. Supposed to take official this fall. I would suspect later. Again, I think from the standpoint of, okay, let's make sure everything's being done in the classroom that needs to be done to get them in. I think from that standpoint, you're probably going to want to wait, see where things are at October, November. But so that's my expectation, but we'll see. To Kevin's point about the defense and showing it, like, it just brought a thought to my, like, the one thing, and we talked about this with Jeremiah, but we're going to see it on defense too. Ohio State's in a very interesting spot right now where, and this isn't to downplay the other guys. Like, I'm not downplaying Denzel Burke, JT, Sawyer, a player like a Mecca Ibuka. I'm not downplaying them, but we're kind of like in that social media influencer era, and Jeremiah and Caleb Downs on defense are like transcendent. Like, they have huge followings. Everyone knows who they are. All sorts of like high school kids like those are going to be like their favorite players. If you're a receiver, Jeremiah Smith's going to be like, even if you're like from Texas or California, like Jeremiah Smith's going to be like your favorite player. If you're a defensive back, like even if you're from New York or Georgia, especially with Caleb, like, Caleb Downs, like, these are transcendent talents. They're not just, and again, I say this kind of tongue in cheek, but like, they're not just like your run of the mill first round draft picks. They are transcendent talents. And that's going to have an impact on recruiting. And it's not going to necessarily be like 25. It may not even be 26, but it's going to create this generation of players, probably, like 28, 29, 30, that like grew up like idolizing these guys. Not just like, man, I really like watching a Mecca Ibuka. No, it's like, I idolize Caleb Downs. I want to be exactly like Caleb Downs. I want to be exactly like Jeremiah Smith. These two guys not only are like freakish athletes, they get endorsements. Caleb Downs is getting the Beats endorsement. They're getting these big company endorsements. They're like legendary film studiers already. Those two watch more film than anyone on the team. And that will pay dividends. And it's just, everyone, and that's the funny thing. And Micah says Caleb Downs was quiet. And Jeremiah's not super like boisterous either, but they are transcendent talent. Like, they command respect. And it's going to be interesting to see what that means in 5-6 years when we've got this generation of kids who are now, they're 10, 11, 12 right now, and they're like idolizing these guys in a way that even your standard first round picks don't get idolized. And that's going to be interesting to me.
Well, and people too, I think that the people also are saying in terms of quiet that he didn't have, 2 interceptions and 1.5 sacks and everything else there, but you play the action that comes to you at some points, and Lathan had a much bigger game. I mean, Lathan Ransom in the Akron game was much more impactful in terms of what his production numbers were, but that isn't a matter of, well, maybe Caleb isn't all that he was cracked up to be. Again, you were dealing with a Joe Moorhead offense with very limited talent, but still Joe Moorhead kind of tinkering it around. And he's a very good offensive coordinator. I think he certainly was on Ohio State's OC list of, names to at least call when they, ended up bringing in Bill O'Brien and then bringing in Chip Kelly. You don't necessarily have to blow up in every game because, we see, Jack Sawyer, he came on late last season and he kind of picked it up again this year. JT had a sack early in the game. It was like, oh, well, he must think it's Penn State, because of Joe Moorhead or whatever at that point. But I wanted to Mark's other point about generational players and idolization. We went through I've been watching Ohio State since I've been a little kid. Oh, who's your favorite player? Zeke Elliott, and then we went through it with the Bosas, and then we went through it with Chase Young. I mean, so there is this thing, and it just reminds you we're all getting older, and they're all still the same age, because a high school junior is still a high school junior, still a high school junior. But these are going to be guys that there's going to be are going to draw like moths to a flame. It's going to be important, and I think that it's certainly in Ohio State's favor.
Well, we tried to go maybe an hour or so. Oh my goodness,
what do we got? An hour 20.
Well, now it's definitely time to wrap up. Tony's in the chat. Oh my
goodness. How do I ban him? No. All right. Yeah, I did. Show yourself on camera, you coward. I guess there's a question here that we got through our messages from Tony. A question of a couple of people on Twitter asking if Jaem Stewart is going to be in the class. I only tuned in about 15 minutes ago. No, we've not addressed that now. Stewart did go to social and said there were going to be a couple of big statements or whatever. And, I think one of them is whether or not he's going to reclassify to 2025 from 2026. I will say this, and I'm saying this as the person that, I've talked to Jaem in person, but I don't keep tabs on him, so I don't know the latest. I'm just going to hand it to Mark for that. He was retweeting a lot of USC stuff last night. Now, granted, USC was like the only game in town, assuming he did not have DirecTV, so he was able to see it somehow. But, what's the latest on Jaem?
Yeah, so again, there's no reason to think he's not going to reclassify. Like, he's almost surely reclassifying. Here's the vibe I've got from Jaem and from talking to people around him. I don't think he's as keen on LSU as you would think. And they're up there. They're on his short list. But I also know the history of hearing that before about guys down there, and then they end up at LSU. And I don't even think it's because that stuff isn't true. Like, maybe they aren't as keen on LSU as but the pressure to stay there, the aggressiveness with which LSU recruits its own state, the family pressure at times for certain kids, it's just one of those things where no matter how much good I hear about Ohio State for Jaem, or I hear about Jaem not staying in state, it's still like in the back of my mind, like, okay, like let's see, like it's one thing to say it right now. Let's see when it's time to pack up the suitcase and get on the plane and go somewhere else. And so that's kind of where I'm at. Ohio State and USC very much in the picture. Obviously last night, a pretty good showing for USC's defense versus maybe what we expected to see. Another kind of LSU disappointment in these early season non-league games. I don't think he particularly wants to go to LSU right now, as we sit here today. So that means Ohio State has just as good a chance as anybody at that point. And I think Ohio State, USC are the two to watch there. But
some kids just want to get away, but it's hard.
But it's hard. It's hard way to get away. And as was put in the chat, the pressure in Louisiana is going to be tough to be. That is what I'm waiting to see, because we can sit here and say all the right things today. Oh yeah, Ohio State's in great shape. They're doing a great job with him. He loves Larry Johnson. He loves Columbus. Mind was blown. His coaches, talk about how much he likes Ohio State and Larry Johnson. And we can say that until the cows come home. But then in December, when he's got to actually get on the plane and go somewhere else, what does can he withstand the pressure that we've seen a lot of young men, like 17, 18-year-olds, not be able to withstand in the past, and they end up at LSU, even though so many people tell you, like, I don't know that he really wants to stay home. So that's kind of where I'm at. Like I said, I think Ohio State's positioned itself in a great spot. I think The depth chart is amazing for him right now because they're going to tell him, and rightfully so, he's that type of player that he can play kind of inside and outside. He can kind of play all over the line, which he's capable of doing. And they're losing like so many guys up front. Maybe you fit best at D tackle when you're gonna like there's gonna be like 4 open positions for him to try out for if you would get to campus in the spring or in the winter. And so the opportunity they're able to present is amazing. I'm just still like, there's this thing in the back of my mind. Like, it's like, okay, the LSU, the Louisiana pressure, but all things equal, like how I think he's hit it off with the coaches, how I think he likes the culture environment around the program, all things equal, I think Ohio State's done the best job recruiting him. And I think USC's done the second best job recruiting him. And he may not end up at either of those schools, but that's just how I have it today.
Well, and if he reclassifies and he has a December signing period or a February signing period, just because he commits somewhere here in September doesn't mean that's where he's going to end up either. You don't know. And that's, I'm not putting evil on Jaem Stewart by saying, make up your damn mind. How can you not, commit somewhere and mean it for 3 or 4 months? But pressure happens. I mean, he could commit to a lot of big defensive linemen from the South have been committing to USC only to decommit from USC. And I'm not saying that I'm foaming the runway warning you that it's going to be USC. I'm just saying that stuff changes. I mean, Ohio State's had kids out of Georgia that it looks like it's going to sign and loses them along the way. And, fortunately at this point, some of the ones that have decommitted have not necessarily come back to bite them in the butt, but it happens. I mean, and that's why everybody loves following recruiting and why we're able to do what we do.
It's the Bachelor for sports fans.
Exactly. Even though a lot of recruiting writers, for some odd reason, watch The Bachelor, I don't
either.
I'm not just. I've got enough drama in my life. I can assure you of that. And I'm going to have a lot more drama in my life if I'm not off of here in the next couple of minutes at the 90-minute mark.
Yeah, we wanted to go about an hour. Like we talked about last week. We want to do these for about an hour every Monday. So we're closing in on an hour and a half. So I think we've kind of covered a lot of things today, what people want to talk about. So we'll wrap this up. We'll continue to follow Jaem Stewart and some of these other situations. Naeem Offord, of course, as he makes his little trips around the country while committed to Ohio State, and the Buckeyes try to hold on to him. So stay locked in at BuckeyeHuddle.com. And again, we should be fine to do this next Monday. Buckeyes play Western Michigan. We got no travel. So should be able to do this again next Monday afternoon. We'll try and get the time out a little bit earlier to you guys, try and get a time locked in a few days in advance just for next week's show. But great numbers today. I think about almost twice as many as last week. I mean, so got a good turnout today. Appreciate everyone watching and listening, and we'll talk to you again soon.